Hello everybody, my name is Kudzie Mapiye, and on this channel I do videos about my life living here in Australia, and I also share different life lessons that I've learned along the way. In today's video I'm going to be cooking one of my favorite Zimbabwean dishes, which is oxtail stew. So I'm just gonna share my secret, which after this video will be a not so secret recipe for oxtail, and how I love to eat my oxtail. So first off, I'm going to add my oxtail in a big stewing pot, and I like to add a whole onion, a red onion, because they tend to add a sweetness to the meat. And I also add a whole carrot to the meat, and these two things really give that meat a little bit of sweetness. And then I'm gonna add some salt, and I love to measure my salt in my hand. It's something that I've always done since I was a child. It's like my eye can just really estimate when the salt is in my hand. Next up, I'm going to be adding some garlic powder. This is this is my favorite cooking ingredient. I think I put garlic powder in literally everything. I love garlic powder. It adds a very nice flavor to the meat, and I believe it also kind of tenderizes it. I don't know, I think it does. Anyway, I love garlic. Next, I'm going to add some water to the stew, because oxtail does take a very long time to cook, so it will need to boil for hours. So I'm going to add some water to the oxtail so that it can boil. And with this particular meal, I had this oxtail boiling, stewing for about 3 hours. So I've just switched on the stove just to get that meat cooking, and as you can see here, it's boiling away, and you can start to see the onions are starting to fall apart. The flavor from the onions is getting into the meat, and it's doing its magic. So just gonna leave the pot to boil. So what I did throughout this is I just added more water. When the water reduced, when it was almost finishing, I would add another kettle of water to fill up the pot. And as you can see now, after I filled it up a couple of times, the water is finally finished and the oxtail is ready. And you can see that the onion has completely disappeared into the stew because it has gone to flavor the meat. Now this is the secret part of my recipe. So what I like to do with my oxtail is actually to just put it on a baking tray and put it in the oven. And the reason I do this is so that I can really render the fat on the oxtail. Oxtail is a very fatty portion of meat, and as you can see, there's like big chunks of fat, and with fatty meat you really need to have it rendered, otherwise it's not going to be good. It's going to literally make you sick. So I like to render the fat in the oven. This keeps the meat intact, because sometimes if you try and render the meat in the pot, as you're turning it around and as it's cooking, it might start to disintegrate and to fall off the bone. So I like my oxtail to be very, very tender, but I like the meat to still be on the bone. And I'm also going to fish out the remaining carrot. So most of the carrot stayed intact, and I'll just fish it out and then throw it out later. And next, I'm going to add the broth from the oxtail into a separate bowl. So because the meat and the vegetables that were in the meat have produced this nice broth. I really don't want to throw it away. I want to scoop it out into a separate bowl so that I can reintroduce it into the stew later on. So that's what I'm doing in this part. I'm just storing my broth for later, and I'm just now, as the oxtail is rendering and is browning in the oven, I'm going to start making my sauce for the stew. So I added just a tiny little bit of olive oil because there is some fat already in the pot from the oxtail itself, and I'm going to saute some veggies. I've got some red onion, green and red capsicum, and carrot, and I'm just going to saute that in the pot. I'm using, as you can notice, the same pot that I used to boil the oxtail, because you can see the little browning bits on the side of the pot. That is actually some of the flavor that has come out from the oxtail, and I don't want to lose that. Next, I'm going to be adding some sweet paprika to the vegetables as they saute, and you'll notice I didn't add any salt because the oxtail has salt. The broth that I'm going to reintroduce has salt as well. So, and there's a little bit of broth in the sauce that I'm using to cook the veggies, so I really didn't need to add any more salt. Next, I'm gonna add some allspice. I've got a bit of curry flavor in there as well, and I am also going to be adding my favorite ingredient, garlic powder. So I'm going to add more garlic powder to make the sauce, because like it's garlic and everything. I'm gonna stir it around, just mix it around, make sure that everything is mixed in, make sure that those spices are evenly distributed into the vegetables as they cook. And you can see I'm just scraping those little bits of flavor from the pot as well to make sure that they are in the stew. Next, we're going to be picking some vegetables from our garden. Look at our cute little garden. So the meal that we're making today is actually sadza with green vegetables and oxtail. This is a very authentic traditional Zimbabwean meal. It's usually had like with these accompaniments in Zimbabwe. So we're just picking the green vegetables, and it was so exciting because this was actually the first time we were harvesting our little garden for the season. So yeah, and these vegetables were so fragrant, they were so delicious, and they were so fresh and organic. And as you can see here, this is the bunch of vegetables that we managed to gather. This is what we're going to be making our vegetables with on the side. And now I'm just chopping the green vegetables. This is the style we chop the vegetables in Zimbabwe when we're cooking vegetables, either to add into sauce or to cook on the side. And today we're cooking them on the side. So I'm just going to chop them up and add them, put them into a little bowl and cook them a little bit later. So I just showed you that little part to show you how we prepared the vegetables. So we did that before we started the sauce. So now back to the sauce, I'm going to be adding some tomato, some canned tomato. This is just mashed up chopped tomato, and I'm going to add that into the stew for flavor and thickening, and I'm going to mix it into the vegetables, and I will let that cook for a little bit. So here I'm just mixing the tomatoes and the vegetables, and also still scraping the little bit of flavor on the side of the pot, and just gonna let them cook and mix. until the tomato is done. And you can see when the tomatoes are done because the fat will kind of rise to the top. That's how you know they're done. And now there is my oxtail straight out of the oven. As you can see, it has browned. The meat is still intact and the fat has been rendered. So that is the result that we wanted. Next step is we are going to reintroduce the oxtail back into the sauce. And that's what I'm doing here. Just make sure that all the oxtail goes back into the sauce so we can start mixing the flavor of the oxtail and the sauce. So that's how the oxtail is looking in the pot, and I'm just going to mix it around. And because it's been in the oven, it's actually easier to mix because the meat is still intact. So you can really mix it in easily. Next, I'm going to reintroduce that broth from the oxtail that I took out when I was putting it into the oven. So I'm going to reintroduce some of that broth back into the oxtail and mix it around. And that is basically to just make sure that no flavor is lost. So that oxtail was boiling for hours. That flavor is in the broth, and we want to make sure that the flavor is mixed into the stew. So just mix it around, and that's it. Now for the final product. There is the oxtail stew done. And what I'm doing now is just adding a little bit of water. So the reason I'm doing this to just add more sauce and just to make sure, that the broth is not too concentrated. So just breaking down the flavors a little bit. And voila, that is the oxtail sauce, stew, whatever you like to call it, done. And this is the final product: salsa, vegetables, and some oxtail stew. Hope you enjoyed this recipe.